Today's video is brought to you by Surfshark. Hello and welcome to my channel. Rhino here. Today, I'm looking at a video on Cameron Bertuzzi's channel, Capturing Christianity. I felt a little bit bad a few weeks ago when I dismissed his statement that he no longer takes atheists seriously in a rather offhanded manner. I mostly did that because it was a response to Braxton Hunter, not Cameron, so I didn't want to get into the weeds of responding to a different video in the middle of my response video, but I am a bit hurt that he doesn't take me seriously when I am clearly the most serious of atheist content creators. So here I am now pretending to take Cameron seriously after saying that I don't take him seriously to see why he doesn't take me seriously. Let's go! But first, a word from our sponsor, Surfshark. Are you worried about privacy on the internet in this day and age? If not, you probably should be. And one of the most important tools in the privacy toolbox is Surfshark VPN. Surfshark VPN is a virtual private network which allows you to appear to be connected to the internet from any location where Surfshark has a server. By connecting through Surfshark, you can access streaming services from different geographic locations. This means you may have access to additional libraries of movies and TV shows not available in your home area. But that's not all they do. With their Clean Web 2.0 features, you can automatically block ads, reject unwanted cookies without fumbling through that pop-up first, get alerts when a website was the target of a data breach, and block malware. And honestly, just ditching the cookies pop-up on nearly every site is entirely worth the price. But you get a VPN as well. Surfshark VPN adds an extra layer of encryption to your devices, keeping you secure on public networks. I always connect to public networks through Surfshark. Surfshark VPN is easy to use and simple to install. They do not monitor, track, or store your data, and it works on phones, tablets, and laptops with no extra fees. It is such a good product that I am completely confident that they are going to let me tell you that I am not wearing any pants right now. I'm confident about that because they know that that won't be enough to stop you from signing up now. And signing up is completely risk-free. Surfshark offers a 30-day money-back guarantee. My viewers also get a special promo where you can get an extra 4 months added to your subscription for free. Go to surfshark.com/Rhino or use code Rhino at checkout to get 4 extra months of Surfshark VPN. Again, that's surfshark.com/RHINO for an extra 4 months for free. This is a limited time offer, so sign up today. And remember, by signing up for Surfshark VPN, you're helping to support my channel. Thank you.
So roughly 13 years ago, my brother became an atheist. We were brought up non-denominational, evangelical Christians, so this came as quite a shock, as you might imagine.
Not sure why that would be a shock to you. Christianity is a religion that is losing members to religious switching faster than any other religion, after all. And when you look at the numbers, more than half of Americans that were raised non-denominational no longer identify with that group as adults. And yeah, that's not exclusively people who left Christianity in general. That would also include people like Cameron who switched denominations. But still, it's not surprising if you are familiar with the data. Side note, I've always been rather amused by the denomination known as non-denominational. Like, yeah, there's no rigid denominational structure, but you can still look up sub-denominations of the non-denominational churches and find out what their approved beliefs and practices are. For instance, the Church of Christ calls itself non-denominational, but churches affiliated with them all believe in adult baptism, weekly communion, and worship without the use of instruments. Seems like one of those 6 of one, half dozen of the other type of scenarios.
Now, I actually went through my own period of doubt right after high school, but I got over it pretty quickly. Like, I personally doubted whether or not Jesus actually existed, but I had those doubts overcome pretty quickly when I learned that Jesus was actually mentioned by non-Christian historians like Josephus.
Weird that your doubt seems to be solely focused on whether or not Jesus existed in the first place. I mean, certainly if he did not, then it doesn't make sense to believe in the religion that relies on his existence. But it seems to me that if you're capable of doubting his existence, then even if his existence is conclusively demonstrated to you, you'd still be capable of doubting that the stories about him in the Bible were completely accurate. Like, even if I grant that the handful of extra biblical mentions of Jesus are enough to definitively prove that he existed for sure, the best you get there is that Jesus was a real dude who lived and was executed by Pilate. None of them give any credence to his miracles or the claim of the resurrection. There is a lot of legwork between I believe Jesus was a real guy and I believe everything the Bible says about Jesus.
So after I learned that he became an atheist, I thought I could overcome his doubts pretty easily.
Now I'm picturing Cameron's brother actually being familiar with the myriad of arguments against Christianity, and then Cameron just walking up to him and being like, "But Josephus mentioned Jesus once, though," and then being confused as to why that didn't convince him.
But I was wrong. I was very, very wrong.
Yeah, can't say that I'm surprised.
What's up, everyone? Cam here. In this video, I'm telling you the story of how after 10 years of study, I no longer take atheism seriously. Now, I started this video telling you about my brother, and that's all very relevant to where I'm at now. I used to take atheism very, very seriously. But pretty much the only thing I knew about atheism back then was that a lot of really smart, like scientists were atheists, right?
And honestly, that is a good reason to take something seriously. If a bunch of people who are smarter than you take it seriously, then maybe you should too. Hell, that's one of the reasons why I continue to take Christianity seriously. There are a bunch of really smart people that are Christians, so it's prudent to not dismiss them offhandedly like I do with Cameron.
I had heard the name Richard Dawkins, but I didn't know what he actually said about religion. I just knew that really smart people were atheists.
Of course it comes back to Dawkins. It's always Dawkins. He is atheism's William Lane Craig. Seems smart and thoughtful, but when you peel back the layers of sophistry, there's not much substance there. Hell, he's even got the atheist equivalent of a low-bar bill statement. If you're not familiar, Dr. Craig admitted that he wanted Christianity to be true so badly that he lowered the epistemic bar that it must meet in order to justify belief, in his opinion.
I thought to myself, and I'm not kidding, I thought, if there is just one chance in a million that this is true, it's worth believing. And so my attitude toward this is just the opposite of Kyle's. Far from raising the bar or the epistemic standard that Christianity must meet to be believed, I lower it.
So, what did Dawkins say that is the atheist equivalent of that? That he is a cultural Christian now because of how fundamentally decent the religion is.
I call myself a cultural Christian. I'm not a believer, but there's a distinction between being a believing Christian and being a cultural Christian. So I count myself a cultural Christian. I think it wouldn't matter if we substituted any alternative religion. That would be truly dreadful. If I had to choose between Christianity and Islam, I choose Christianity every single time. I mean, it seems to me to be a fundamentally decent religion in a way that I think Islam is not.
That's a bit of a departure from his earlier God is the most unpleasant character in all fiction rhetoric, isn't it? Now, don't get me wrong here, Dawkins and Craig are both intelligent men, but they both seem to be using their intelligence to rationalize otherwise unjustified beliefs. So, yeah.
But let's return to the story, okay? After I learned that my brother became an atheist, I decided I was going to meet with him and like crush all of his objections, okay? This ended up being like the worst idea that I could have come up with. My brother and I met, and it turned out to be literally like one of the worst nights of my life. He raised objections to Christianity I had never even dreamt of, but that night showed me that I really had no clue why I believed in Christianity.
You know, I think I might have been right earlier when I imagined Cameron going after his brother solely with the fact that Jesus is mentioned by non-Christian historians a few times. Unfortunately, it looks like that conversation might be the inciting incident that led to the formation of the Capturing Christianity channel, so you have Cameron's brother to thank for that.
So after that night, I started to look into the arguments for and against God's existence. I wanted to know whether or not God's existence was actually reasonable. And after just a few weeks of study, I quickly learned that there are very powerful arguments for God's existence.
And I quickly learned that the best arguments in favor of God were based on fallacious reasoning with a healthy dose of sophistry to cover up the fallacies.
I found the Kalam cosmological argument, contingency arguments, teleological arguments from fine-tuning, arguments from consciousness, moral arguments, and so on. Like there's actually a ton of arguments for the existence of God. Check out this video, got it linked right here, in which we lay out over 150 arguments for God's existence that show up in the literature.
Don't get too excited about that one. It's not 150 unique arguments for God. It's 19 categories of arguments for God, with a bunch of variations being counted as individual arguments, even when they effectively say the exact same thing. So like, they'll have the uncaused cause version of the cosmological argument as formulated by Aquinas as one argument, and then the Kalam cosmological argument as another one, despite those being basically the same, with the Kalam actually being weakened a bit to avoid the obvious special pleading in Aquinas' version. It's list padding at its finest.
Now, this might lead you to think that this kind of like settles the matter. Like, don't all of these arguments for God's existence prove that atheism is unreasonable?
If you think that quantity is more important than quality, then maybe. Looking at you, Mike Winger. But having a lot of arguments is not the same as having a lot of good arguments.
Well, not so fast. Okay, first of all, every single argument has responses from atheists, and you've kind of got to do the work going through those responses.
And likewise, the fact that there is a response to every argument is not the same as those responses being good responses. Now, obviously, I find the responses more convincing than the arguments, or my career wouldn't make any sense. But we do need to be consistent in recognizing that quality is more important than quantity.
But secondly, there are also powerful arguments for atheism.
Yes and no. In most cases, atheism is a response to a theist making a claim. You say God exists, I say I don't believe you. There's not really evidence for this position. It's the classic lack of belief atheism that I'm sure Cameron just hates. But he does need to deal with the fact that, from a practical standpoint, that is just how it works most of the time. Then, there is positive atheism, the claim that there is no God, which is more of a case-by-case thing. I am perfectly willing to make the positive claim that God does not exist once you define exactly what you mean by God. I have yet to see a theistic definition of God that does not have excellent arguments against it, leaving me convinced that no theistic God exists. Now, you can define God in a more nebulous manner in order to escape all of the arguments against theistic gods, but at that point, you are retreating into unfalsifiability in order to defend your position. And the God that you wind up with there is functionally the same as no God, so I see no reason to believe in it.
Now, the best argument that atheists have, at least that I've found, is the problem of evil.
Well, I can agree that that might be the best argument against an all-powerful and benevolent God, sure, but again, it's a matter of what God you are claiming to believe in. If you believe in the God described by the Bible, then I would argue that that isn't even a benevolent God to begin with, and there are a lot of better arguments against that God using the Bible as the measuring stick for what God should be.
The problem of evil is so powerful, in fact, that it's led a lot of people to say, look, okay, sure, you've got arguments for the existence of God, but the problem of evil is so powerful that it defeats all of those arguments.
If you claim that God is benevolent and all-powerful, then yeah, it kind of does. Because an all-powerful and benevolent God would be capable of creating a world without suffering. Even if you claim that free will is so important as to justify all the suffering, such a God could create a world with free will and with no suffering. After all, I can have the will to do things that it is impossible for me to do in this world. Doesn't matter how much I have the will to fly by flapping my arms, that is not physically possible in the world we inhabit. God supposedly designed the universe, including which things would and would not be physically possible, so he could design a universe where any action that would result in suffering is just not physically possible, no matter how much will people have to commit such actions. And for Christians using the free will defense, it gets worse. If you believe that there is free will in heaven, then you necessarily also believe that it is possible for a world to exist with free will and no suffering, because that is exactly what heaven is at this point.
So to quickly summarize, the problem of evil is an argument against an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-good God. Here's a really common way that it's expressed these days. Premise 1, if God exists, pointless suffering does not exist. Premise 2, pointless suffering exists. Therefore, 3, conclusion, God does not exist.
Personally, I would remove the adjective pointless from these premises, as if an all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good God exists, then there is no such thing as suffering with a point, because whatever the end goal of that suffering is, the God that this is arguing against has the ability to shortcut the process, skip the suffering, and just wind up at the end result that was supposed to be the point of the suffering.
Both premises in this argument seem pretty plausible. Like if God did exist, he would probably not permit any pointless suffering.
Correct, with my aforementioned caveat about the adjective pointless. It is a rather pointless.
All suffering would have some kind of purpose. The Bible even says that God is working all things toward our good.
Yeah, well, the Bible also says that more people go to hell than heaven, and says that it's better to not be born. So if God is working toward our good, then when looking at these other two verses, that means that God wouldn't have created any of us in the first place, because according to the Bible, that would have been best.
So premise 1 seems pretty plausible. Premise 2 also seems pretty plausible. Like just look around a bit and you'll find cases of seemingly pointless suffering.
Yeah. Even given the free will excuse and claiming that suffering builds character or whatever, babies die of cancer all the time in very painful ways. The baby never got a chance to build character and didn't live long enough to exercise any significant amount of free will, so that is pretty undeniably pointless. Unless you want to argue that losing a child builds the character of that child's parents, and that torturing a baby to death is worth that character-building experience of the parents, which is all kinds of fucked up. But that is why apologists, when arguing for objective morality, have to resort to the example of torturing babies for fun as something that we know is wrong.
We know that it's objectively wrong to torture infants for fun.
Every one of us knows that torturing an innocent baby for fun is wrong. Do we understand that torturing babies for fun is really wrong?
That it's truly always wrong to torture a baby for fun.
Because without adding the "for fun" to the end of that statement, we wind up with a problem, because God is supposed to be the source of morality, but God tortures babies. So torturing babies on its own can't be immoral, so it must be that he just doesn't do it for fun.
Now, as you might expect, just like atheists have responses to the arguments for God's existence, Christians have responses to both premises in the argument from evil.
And my bet is that they rely on the inclusion of the word pointless rather than responding to the more robust form of the argument from evil.
Some Christians argue that God can allow pointless suffering.
Okay, but if God allows pointless suffering, then he is no longer omnibenevolent, so an omnibenevolent God does not exist in such a framework.
Others argue that while some suffering might seem pointless on the surface, it still nevertheless has a purpose.
And that's where you find people arguing that babies dying of cancer is good, actually, because it allows the parents to go through personal growth, which is just gross, if I'm honest.
But that's not what I'm doing in this video. Like, I wasn't convinced that atheism is silly because Christians have responses to these premises.
Then one wonders why you bothered to bring any of this up. Now go on, tell me why you don't take me seriously. Come on. I don't know why you wouldn't take me seriously. I'm the most serious of everyone.
The reason why I don't take atheism seriously any longer is because even if we accept the atheist's strongest argument, it still wouldn't prove atheism.
Okay, so is this where you retreat away from the God that you actually believe in, so that you can say that the atheist arguments, maybe they prove that God wrong, but because they aren't applicable to all potential definitions of God, atheism is therefore not worth consideration? Because, if I may be frank, that's just stupid. And that is not a word that I use lightly. But if you have to abandon the God that you believe in order to justify not taking atheism seriously, then that is, as I said, stupid. At best here, you're just wanting the atheist that you're thinking of to use the term agnostic instead of atheist. And if that's the case, you are throwing your Lord and Savior, Jesus Horatio Christ, under the bus in order to win a definition fight that nobody really cares about. I consider that a win from the atheist standpoint. It essentially acknowledges that you are incapable of actually defending the God that you believe in, so you have to resort to definition fights in order to try and force the atheist into a defensive position.
And now I'm kind of realizing that I probably should have defined atheism a lot earlier on. Well, philosophically, atheism is the view that there are no gods. It's very simple. There's no creator, there's no designer of the universe. We weren't created for some purpose by somebody.
And notice his use of the word philosophically here. He's not talking about atheism in a practical sense, where for people living their everyday lives, it just means that they don't believe in any god or gods. He's talking about philosobro-atheism, where the claim is being made that no gods exist. Outside of a formal debate setting, nobody really cares about that distinction, except for apologists who have found their God difficult or impossible to defend. Because out here in the real world, it's not a matter of who is making the positive claim, it's a matter of who is trying to change whose mind. For the most part, an atheist talking about such things with a Christian doesn't much care whether or not the Christian deconverts, but the Christian is likely trying to evangelize, to save the atheist's soul. So they do care about convincing them. As such, regardless of where the burden of proof would be in a formal debate, the Christian here has the burden of proof because they actually want to convince the atheist. In the vast majority of real-world scenarios, if the Christian were to take Cameron's route and convince the atheist that atheism hasn't met its burden of proof, then the best they can hope for is that the atheist says, okay, I guess I'm technically agnostic then. I still don't believe you. Nothing has changed in that scenario except the Christian won the definition fight and abandoned their God in order to do so. Is that really the kind of victory that you want here, Cameron?
Theism, on the other hand, is the view that at least one God exists. So atheism has no gods and theism has at least one God. But so why doesn't the problem of evil establish atheism? Well, simply because there are many other kinds of gods that it doesn't rule out.
Okay, Cameron, but does it rule out your God? If so, that's a massive problem for you. And if not, one wonders why you even need to bring it up, rather than just explaining why it doesn't rule your God out.
The British philosopher Philip Goff is a really good example of someone that adopts a sort of non-standard view of God.
So we're in this situation where the believers are tying themselves up in knots trying to explain suffering. The atheists are tying themselves up in knots trying to explain fine-tuning. When in fact, there are middle ground options that can elegantly account for both of these data points. Consider, for example, the hypothesis of a God of limited power. A God who's made the best universe they can. Maybe God simply can't create complex life in an instant. Maybe the only way God can create intelligent life is by creating a universe with the right physics that is eventually going to evolve intelligent life. And God's like, I'm sorry, I know it's going to be messy. This is all I can do, is this or nothing. I think this hypothesis can account for both the fine-tuning in terms of God's purposes and the suffering in terms of God's limitations.
Well, that's all fine and good, I guess. But Cameron, is that the God that you believe in or not? Because when I have discussions with Christians, they're usually not willing to concede God's omnipotence like Goff does. Now, I remain unconvinced by Goff's argument. The universe isn't really all that fine-tuned, and even considering the degree to which it appears fine-tuned, we don't know whether it could even have been otherwise, or whether a God was needed to make it fine-tuned. So concluding with God is unwarranted at this time.
So even though God is all good, perfectly benevolent on this view, given his limit in power, there's no way that he can stop all of the suffering in the world.
But again, I ask, is that the God that you believe exists? If the answer is no, then why is that the God that you are defending instead of the one that you do actually believe in? If the reason you don't take atheism seriously is that it proves your God wrong but doesn't prove all gods wrong, then I see no reason to take you seriously.
What I want you to notice here, and this is really important, the problem of evil, which is, once again, one of the atheists' best arguments, doesn't touch this particular view of God that we just went over. It doesn't touch it at all.
Not that iteration of it, no. But again, is that particular view of God your particular view of God? Because that's all that matters when I am talking to you. I don't care if you can show that my argument doesn't work against some nebulous, ill-defined God that neither of us believe in. That doesn't matter. Does it work against your God?
Think about it like this. Okay, scientists used to believe that the speed of light was infinite. When we discovered evidence that the speed of light was finite instead of infinite, we didn't conclude that there's no such thing as light, right?
No. But you know what we did conclude? We did conclude that light with infinite speeds does not exist.
We modified our concept of the speed of light, one of the properties of light.
So, are you modifying your concept of God or of the properties of God?
So, what I'm saying here is that the best case scenario for the atheist in this argument should really just lead us to revise our view of God. It shouldn't lead us to become atheists.
And have you done that? If so, please provide a new definition of the God that you believe in, along with a list of properties you believe him to have. And I can pretty much guarantee that I'll not believe in that God either, and with good reason not to. But if not, why not? That's where the meaningful discussion can be had. Definition fights are pointless. Define your God and then be prepared to defend that definition of God. Complaining that one version of an atheist argument against an omnipotent and benevolent God doesn't work against a God that you don't believe in either is not a productive discussion for anyone.
Keep in mind, I'm not saying that the problem of evil is sound or persuasive. Personally, I think there are many good responses to the problem of evil, like the soul-building theodicy.
I've already covered his video on the soul-building theodicy, so I'll leave a link to that. Basically, suffering develops character, so that's why there's suffering. Well, what about babies who die during childbirth? Well, there's character development that happens in heaven that doesn't require suffering, and that's a different kind of character development that is just as good as the character development brought about through suffering. Therefore, suffering is a net benefit somehow. If that didn't add up to you, you're not alone.
I'm saying that even if we grant it, hypothetically, if we grant it, it doesn't come anywhere close to even establishing atheism.
But it does establish that your God does not exist. And that's enough for me.
Something else important I want you to notice is that the same cannot be said of arguments for God's existence. If we grant that the arguments go through for God's existence, then they would actually prove that at least one God is real.
But they don't even get you close to any specific God. In most cases, you get to deism at best.
So the move that I'm making here by hypothetically granting their argument is not available to the atheists. They can't hypothetically grant the arguments for theism.
In most cases, no, but that's because of the nature of the discussion. You claim God exists. I don't believe you. If I hypothetically grant an argument for your God, then I'm hypothetically granting God's existence. But the fact that such hypotheticals don't work for atheism is not a point in theism's favor. I don't even know why you would think that it was. Also, note that I said in most cases here. Why is that? Well, if we rewind the tape a bit, we'll see that the Kalam cosmological argument was the first in his list of very powerful arguments for God. But if we pull up his slide showing the Kalam argument, taken from his stream where he went through all 150 arguments for God, we see that it does not actually conclude with a God. It concludes with a cause. If I hypothetically grant everything about the Kalam cosmological argument, it means that the universe had a cause. It says nothing about the nature of that cause. So there are at least some arguments that the atheist can hypothetically grant in full.
Instead, they just sort of have to trust that every argument for God's existence fails, even the ones they've never heard of.
Well, so far, every argument that I have heard of has failed, and the ones that I've heard of are the ones that are most popular among apologists, so there's no reason to think that there's a better argument that's just being kept hidden all this time, only to be whipped out at the last minute as a gotcha. If someone comes up with a genuinely new argument, then I'll pay attention, but until such a time, I think it is reasonable to believe that no gods exist.
Which is actually kind of a giant leap of faith, if you think about it.
So we're in agreement then that faith is a bad way to determine beliefs about reality?
All right, now just so I'm not misunderstood, here's what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that Christians should think that God is limited in power. I'm not saying that we have to make this move, okay?
Well, then maybe you should defend the God that you actually believe in, instead of claiming victory because a God you don't believe in doesn't fail when challenged with the problem of evil.
What I'm saying is that the atheist's best argument doesn't come close to establishing atheism. Not even close.
Philosophical atheism, maybe. Pragmatic atheism, not even close.
So even if we grant the atheist's strongest argument, it does not support atheism. The most it would do, again, hypothetically, is cause us to revise our view of God. That's it. And this is a huge reason why I no longer take atheism seriously.
And after watching the whole video, I'm feeling rather vindicated in my offhanded dismissal of Cameron when it was brought up earlier. That's it for this one. Today's comment of the day comes to us from everyone who pointed out that the Mona Lisa was not, in fact, painted on canvas. On the video where the guy was responding to said that you don't get the Mona Lisa without a canvas. I'm really sorry that I missed that one. That would have actually been a great addition to my spin on his analogy. Thanks for watching. I'll be back next Friday with more, but if you need to get your Rhino fix in before then, I livestream with Cirrus every Wednesday at 8:30 Eastern on my other channel, The Watering Hole. Don't forget to go to surfshark.com/rhino for an extra 4 months for free. Thanks to Piper for being my editor, and special thanks as always to my patrons, who are the atheists who are not taken seriously by the apologist that is my channel. If you'd like Cameron to completely abandon the God that he believes in order to justify dismissing you offhandedly, you can join us on Patreon for as little as $1 per week over at patreon.com/vicerhino, or by supporting the channel in one of the other methods that can be found at links.vicerhino.com, which is also where you'll find links to my other projects. If for whatever reason you want to send me stuff, my PO Box address is in the description. See you next time! Today's video is brought to you... I should have a microphone in front of my face when I do that. Testing. Hey, that was almost bad.